Well, Tom Gray here. Made me a joggle die out of a gate hinge and a few pieces of sheet metal and a hunk of 1/4 inch. It makes joggle dies, joggle bends that you typically see in the edges of sheet metal boxes. I don't have a bead roller, so I wanted to make a joggle, so I made this. I'll show you how I did it. So here is a very typical application for a joggle joint or joggle bend. It's the edge of a toolbox. This is an old, this is a toolbox I made for my A2 Porter cable, and it allows a nice, clean seam on the front of the box or the side of the box. All right, let's get started. Here's our materials. It's just a piece of 1/4 inch strap. It's a little bit wider than 1 3/4, and a gate hinge. And I just fished through the bin at the hardware store till I found one that was fairly tight. And then I just drew a line where the flaps overlay. I don't know what they call that kind of hinge, but it's used for gates. Okay, so the first step is we want our our backset joint or our offset joint to be 1/2 inch wide and 1/8 inch deep. So I'm going to cut an 1/8 inch by 1/2 inch little rabbet out of this piece of 1/4 inch. I'm actually going to make it 1/2 inch plus plate thickness. So we're going to use 18 gauge, so 1/2 inch plus a 1/16, call it. Okay, you just saw me, I scored the bar lightly with the table saw just to make sure it had a nice straight line, and then finished off removing the material with the angle grinder. Start welding, I just cleaned up the surfaces and knocked some of this plating off with a face-off disc. So you can see the prototype bend here. So see how this works is take one of these little die faces, I guess you could call it, and we're going to place the sheet metal in the hinge from this way, and the hinge barrel is going to act as a guide. That's going to gauge it down from the edge, and then you need some distance for bend allowance for the metal to fold. And I want this to be somewhere between 3/8 and 1/2 of an inch. And I'm going to play around a little bit with that alignment. And then we need another piece of material like this, just for example, that will form the top side of the die and will be welded to this side of the hinge. So when this comes around, this piece of metal comes over and smushes this down while the top of the hinge flap holds the larger piece of the sheet even against this surface. And the sharpness of that Z bend is due to the sharpness of the radius or the corners on this and whatever piece I'm going to use for this. So I might round those off a little bit too to make a little bit nicer of a bend. Something that's that harsh of an angle, it adds a lot of stress into the sheet metal. So I'm going to play around with this and get it aligned and in place and find a better piece of material to use for the top side of the die. You can see that gap right in there. That's where the sheet metal is going to flow. This is a piece of 16 gauge. This is a piece of 18 gauge, which mimics the thickness of material we want to work with. And there's a little more than an 1/8 inch gap right there, which is perfect, because that's how much joggle I want. I'm going to start making the forming part by making this side of the die, call it the upper side of the die, and I'm going to make it out of this piece of 1/8 inch bracket material that I found in the bin. And I'm going to cut it out on my little bandsaw, where I set up a 1/2 inch wide rip fence there, just with a piece of scrap and a couple of vice grips. For length, I want it to be the same width as the center barrel here. So just mark that with Sharpie. I hot glued this all together, and you can see the little upper part of the die in there. And this is just temporarily put together just to see if it's going to work. So you can see it's a little bit lopsided. That's because of the hot glue blob underneath it, but that won't hold up under vice pressure. So let's give it a go. My sample work piece is a piece of 19 gauge, just something I was playing with to weld it together. So how this works is I'm going to put this in the die, and this sheet can be as long as it wants, but I'm just going to put it in the die, bottom it against the barrel, like that, fold it shut, and then give her the big squeeze. And it's working. Just got to realign that a little bit better, but that's what we want. And let's see how it works with this piece of Simpson bracketry. Or patch plate, whatever it is. Yep. I found a smaller piece of 16 gauge to use for a spacer. But before I go any further, I'm going to spend some time and smooth out the two halves of the die here. Any rough edges or rough surfaces will just transfer to the sheet metal. So you want to make sure these are nice and smooth. So I'm just going to do that with a file and some sandpaper. So there's everything ready to tack together. I cleaned the plating off of the hinge. I cleaned the plating off of this Simpson thing, and then I sanded these die halves down so they're pretty smooth, and the edges of them are rounded off and nice and smooth, nothing sharp. You want to do that because any marks that are on here are going to get transferred to your sheet metal. You see some guys, watch some YouTube videos like Carl Fisher, he'll even polish. He makes a lot of cool tools if you want to watch his stuff. I think it's Make It Custom, I think is his YouTube channel, but he polishes everything. Makes really cool tools too, so check him out. Alright, I'm going to tack these together. So I drilled a couple of little holes right here in the hinge flap, so I can tack this from behind just to hold it in place. On this side, I'm setting this side of the die back a 1/16 of an inch from the edge of my little sheet metal adapter plate here. just to allow room here for the metal to flow when we bend it. Now you should be able to see, if I can get the camera on it, the gap that it's created where the metal's going to flow. Okay, there it is, all tacked together in one piece. Let's give her a try. Okay, a piece of the Simpson strong tie. Just run it against the barrel of the hinge. Close it. Put a squeeze on her. Shimmy it down. Put the squeeze on her. There you go. Not bad. It went right across those holes, but I think you can still see it. That's what I wanted. Okay, now we need something to hold it in a vise so I don't have to, so I can two-hand the sheet metal. So I think I'm going to put a flange and a flange that sit on the vise jaws that keep this thing oriented. I have these two pieces of 16 gauge from a grill table that I modified, and they look just about right. I'll put them on there like so, and then fold the ends down so the thing stays in the vise when I'm moving the sheet metal. So let me get those bent up and strip this powder coat off and tack them on there. Mark them for center, or just to align one to another. Center it roughly in the vise. That looks about righteous. And bend over the ears. Center the other piece, or I should say align the other piece. Clamp it in the vise and bend over the ears. Now I want to set the height so that the joggle joint is right in the center of the jaws. The middle of the jaws up and down, and the center left to right. So just aligning it like so, and I'll tack these on. Looks a little Frankensteinish, but let's see how she works. Make sure the metal is registered correctly, I guess is important. Slide it down with some overlap. 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 All right, pretty good. See some tool marks on there, but I can clean those up. So I spent some more time with the Dremel, knocking down these welds and just re-smoothing everything out in the die cavity, and made a big difference. So took out the ripples, and that looks pretty good now. So I'm going to finish weld it and give her one more test. Alright, so I sanded everything and wire brushed it and sanded it again, smoothed everything out. It's probably kind of hard to see in the glare, but everything's very smooth. So into the vise it goes. This is a piece of 18 gauge, which is probably the material I use the most. Yep, 18 gauge. Okay, let's see how she does. I'm going to run a joggle right on that edge. There we go. Not too shabby. Couple little marks in it, but not too shabby. So my first bite was from this side, and you can see the little mark is right at the end of the, right exactly at the end of the die. So I'm going to knock these corners down a little bit more. Okay, proof run number 2. It's not the straightest edge in the world, but I'm going to use it anyway. I'm going to back in a little bit. Give her the squeeze. Inch it over. Give it the squeeze. Inch it over. Give it the squeeze. Inch it over. Give it the squeeze. A little bit better. That's a crappy cut I made before. A little bit better. Okay, new edge. A little bit more grinding and shining and polishing. And this time I'm going to go a little bit slower. So I'm going to take a shorter bite, and I'm not going to do the full crimp, the full squeeze. I'll start progressively. Move down. Move down. Move down. And then going back, I'll give it the big squeeze. And there we have it. There's the trick. It's nice. That's pretty nice. For final step, I'm just gonna lube it with some dry lube. The coating of dry lube will not only prevent rust, but on sheet metal tools, it's good to lubricate them. Just makes everything work easier. At least that's what I find. Clean edge, I just sanded it a little bit. Alright, into the die. Seat it. Give it a little smush. Move it. A little smush. A little bit more. More, a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, now the big squeeze on the way out. And we are there. Pretty nice. Profile. You can see the, get it in the camera here. You can see the profile. I radiused the corners a little bit with the flap disc just to make that Z a little bit less dramatic. Well, I'm going to call this one good. This is a success. This baby's going to work. I got a toolbox I need to make, and I want to put a joggled edge on it. So I'm calling this a success, and it's on to the next project. I'll see you there and then.